Hello, and welcome to the Tex Mix, brought to you by Texas Signal. My name is Jessica Montoya Coggins, and today I am joined by Lydia Camarillo.
Hi, pleasure to be here with you all.
Oh, thank you so much. So Lydia, you are with the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project. Could you tell us a little bit about the organization and what y'all do?
Absolutely, thank you. Southwest Voter is an organization, it's one of the civil rights legacy organizations that was started in San Antonio in 1974, but could have been an organization as old as Maldiv, which started in 1968. Why do I say that? Because Willie Velasquez, the founder of Southwest Voter, attempted to get our tax exempt status every year. And finally, in 74, he actually asked Mario Bledo, who at the time was president of Maldiv, am I filling this paperwork incorrectly? What's happening here? And we just hit, Mario happened to be traveling to DC that day or that week and discovered that Willie Velasquez was blacklisted by the administration, meaning they didn't want us to register Mexican Americans to vote. And so Mario at Maldiv obviously made sure and said, no, you have to let Southwest Voter do what it needs to do, much like the NAACP Voter Fund, which we were modeled after, is doing the work. So in 1974, we officially received the status, and Willie began doing the work in a formal way, although he began doing the work since 1968 with a folding chair, a folding table, a rotary phone, and a phone book, calling folks in the morning and making appointments to register them to vote in the afternoon if they were not registered to vote. And that's how it started. And today we are happy to share with you that we have registered over 3 million Latinos, trained 150,000 Latino leaders, and won 210 voting rights lawsuits. And we have a couple of lawsuits pending right now, including 3 with the state of Texas, forgive me. SB4, which is similar to Prop 187 or California's Prop 187, or Arizona's 1070, which is an attack on the immigrant community. And then it's profiling the immigrant community as well. And then of course, the 2021 redistricting maps, we sued on all 4 maps. And the Senate Bill 1, which I know we're going to discuss in more detail today.
Well, that's just an amazing and very shocking story. I mean, this is not exactly ancient history we're talking about. You know, this is just a couple decades ago. How has the Latino vote shifted since Southwest Voter Registration Education Project has been doing this groundwork? You know, we get stories almost every day about the importance of the Latino vote and how influential it can be.
You know, the question is a very important question for a number of reasons. First of all, if we take a look at what was happening in 1976, if we compare it to 2020 elections, there were only 2.4 million registered Latino voters nationally, and only 2 million cast their vote. And I say only, but we also need to remind ourselves that there was less people, less Latinos, less folks that were registered to vote. And in 2020, we're proud to share with you that 18.6 million Latinos were registered to vote, and 16.6 million Latinos cast their vote. How is that an impact? In the growth in terms of registration and turnout, it's dramatic. State by state, the states decide the presidential elections, and Latinos were a deciding factor, not the only factor, but the contributing factor in Arizona, in Georgia, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, and in Wisconsin. As we can say today that there was not as many Latinos turning out to vote, the elections would be different today if they had stayed home. For example, in Georgia, the difference margin of victory was less than a little bit over 10,000 voters, and 105,000 voters turned out to vote that are Latino. Move forward to 2021, which is last year, and the U.S. Senate seat, the 2 runoffs, the 2 senators had runoffs. And that also changed the dynamics of who was going to be the majority leader in the United States through the United States Senate. Latinos turned out twice as many, 105,000 voters turned out to vote in the general presidential election, but 200 and something turned out to vote, and 148 was the margin of difference between both senators. Therefore, if Latinos had stayed home, we'd have a different situation. Today, the president would be Trump, and the majority leader would not be our leader that we have today.
No, I remember those Georgia races. They were so close, and even I believe with now Senator Ossoff, the fact that they forced the runoff, it was something like less than 10,000 votes. So literally every vote matters, and especially when you're talking about these small margins. So you brought up Senate Bill 1, and that is something that I would like to talk with you about. So Senate Bill 1 is a large, we were at Texas Signal referred to it as a voter suppression bill that was passed in the Texas legislature, signed by Greg Abbott last year. They tout it as this is making it easier to vote, harder to cheat, although that is certainly not the case. So how has Senate Bill 1 impacted what y'all are doing in Texas?
I think there's a couple of things that are dramatic to show. First of all, when people needed to register to vote for the deadline of January 31st, we were supposed to all be using a new form, a new voter registration application form. They didn't have any of them. I mean the Secretary of State. We finally received the cards that look identical to the ones, 25,000 that look identical to the old ones, but they were supposed to change the cards because they changed the law where it is now a felony instead of a misdemeanor if you file and you complete the application without truthfully having something correct. So they might have not been citizens, which is really what they're doing, or they might have not, that's not the correct name, or they don't live in the place that they live, or something that they did wrong. So the first order of complication was not enough cards. And the Secretary of State clearly told us and shared throughout the state that became a panic for all of us doing this kind of work. There's no new cards. I don't know how you're going to get people registered to vote. Then they finally produced PDF files that we can all produce and then having people have them, but that became a problem. The next problem that we're facing is that the vote by mail applications are being rejected. Most people that filed a vote by mail are 65 and older. That's the law. It's the requirement. There's no exceptions given the pandemic. So it's only for 65 or older, people that are incarcerated and can still vote and are not felons, people who are traveling out of the country but do not have a chance to vote out of the state, rather, they cannot vote during the time that's the election and the early vote. So it's a very specific amount of time, but they now require more signatures and more matching numbers. And at the first round of applications being submitted, Bexar County, for example, 50% of the applications were rejected. So now the Secretary of State has put together a portal in their website to try and see how you can cure your application. And most friendly county elections offices are immediately letting you know. The deadline is February the 18th to turn in your application. But if it doesn't match certain numbers, including your signature, if it doesn't match your signature and the envelope and everything that they're doing, they're going to reject it. And so for the voters, it's very important that they check to see that their application, if they completed one, works by getting on the line. And if it doesn't work, try to fix it before the deadline. And if it's not fixed by the deadline, which is February the 18th, 5 p.m. and the election center, then they should go and vote in person. So that's part of the problem. The last two things, which I think are worrisome in every sense of the word, is that also partisans can walk into a booth wearing whatever they want to, including INS uniforms and police uniforms, and intimidate people. And they can stand up to us like this. Now, you and I are going to say to somebody, muévete, move over, get away, let me vote. But not everybody will do that. And some folks may not even show up, and we won't be able to record those that don't show up for fear of intimidation. These are tactics that have been used historically. We saw that when in California, when at that time Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez won against one of the most punitive members of Congress. There was a Republican in Orange County. He sent in sheriffs and INS officers to block the doors. And in fact, that went to court and we sued and all of that. But nonetheless, our tactics that happen around before in the past, and they're part of the history of how they know how to do this. Last but not least, and there's other factors, but the other most interesting piece is that if someone needs help, assistance, we can't help them without having to deal with criminal charges. You can't help someone if they need bilingual assistance, if they're disabled. We're not allowed. So this bill is another attempt by the current administration, the Texas administration and legislation, to stop Black voters, Latino voters, Asian voters from casting their vote.
I mean, I've talked with a couple of outlets that are national and trying to explain to them about, voting in Texas. And one thing I always point out is Texas is just one of a handful of states where there actually isn't even online voter registration. You cannot just simply, I lived in New York for a couple of years. When I registered to vote there, I think it maybe took 5 minutes and it's fine. And so Texas is already very prohibitive on that. And going through a lot of these provisions that are in Senate Bill 1, it just does not really, if you really wanted people to be involved in the political process, and I think that's something that people should want, even, whatever side of the aisle, these are things that are counterintuitive to that. Even the idea of having sort of the deputy voter registrar that I could not simply just go to a grocery store and register voters. I would need to be certified to do that. What do you think is kind of behind that? I know that's like a large general question here, but what's the deal?
Every time I try to explain, I find that there is no other explanation for it than saying that Republicans who are in power are trying to sustain their power for as long as they can. They're worried about the whole conversation about the demographics changing in Texas, and so they're going to do their best. In states like New York, Illinois, and California, where more and more legislators have been elected that are not only progressive, but of color. They're either Latino, they're Black, they're something else. They're understanding the changes. When Proposition 187 passed in 1994, one of the first comments was, why did we lose? Meaning Latinos, why did we lose? It was because several factors. There wasn't enough Latinos that were registered to vote. And those that could register to vote didn't understand that they needed to register to vote in order to vote at the time. And most people start thinking about elections 2 weeks out, not 30 days out. So one of the changes that we've been asking for a long, long time is forget about having 30 days out to register to vote. Georgia, Florida, Arizona, and Texas have that requirement. California did, and after Prop 187, it changed it to 7 days. First 10 days, then 7 days. Now you can also register on the same day as Colorado has. So when you begin to see those kinds of changes, you begin to see a change in the policies. So California has some of the most progressive policies when it comes to enhancing the voter registration efforts and enhancing, making sure that the vote that you cast is counted. So one of the things that I would recommend that we all ask our legislators, particularly Republican legislators, we need same-day registration. We need online voter registration. We need to drop the deputization requirement because other states don't have it. It doesn't make any sense. If you want to have a training, sure, let's all have a training, but why not a training online? And rather than it's only done 2 or 3 times per county in order for you to be a volunteer person to register to vote. By then, it's probably too late. Or if the deadline, the day that they said the training is today and tomorrow is when the volunteer starts, they lose a whole month. So there's just a number of barriers that are very, very calculated and targeted at stopping people of color, Latinos, Blacks, Asians, and others from voting in the state of Texas. And it's just not acceptable. We're going to have to continue to make that fight.
Mm-hmm. So previously you mentioned MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. We talk about them a lot at Texas Signal. I know that I'm actually just writing a story right now. I believe they're suing, along with the ACLU, the Texas Secretary of State's office for not providing some documents about voter purges. So could you talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done with groups like that in terms of trying to get a lot of these cases against voter suppression heard in front of courts?
Well, I'm very, very proud of the relationship we have with MALDEF. The president and general counsel serves on our board of Southwest Voter. And I've had the pleasure of doing the same thing. In fact, I think I served around the time your mama was there. You know, she's still on the board, but so your mother, to say it more professionally rather than saying your mama. But we've had a very important relationship. As I mentioned earlier, they're the ones that helped us lift the blacklisting of not allowing us to register voters and allowed us to begin to become a 501c3 organization, forgive me. But we have always sued Texas, and we have been the plaintiffs, and MALDEF has been the lawyers representing us. I mean, going back at least the last 10 years, we certainly sued on the last redistricting maps. We sued on the congressional and the state house. We weren't able to do that for the state Senate or the state Board of Education, as in the case this cycle. We were able to sue on 04. And why did we sue? Well, for example, the congressional maps, we gained 2 in the last cycle, 2 new maps that were Latino majority seats, when Texas gained 4 new congressional seats. This time, Texas gained 2 congressional new seats, and we expected to gain, if not 2, at least 1 new seat that was drawn where Latinos can elect candidates of choice. Well, we started off with 8 Latino majority seats at the congressional level. They took away CD 23 and CD 15. 23 is the one from San Antonio all the way to El Paso, and the 15 is from McAllen up north all the way to Austin. We lost that seat. It was retrogressed. It was drawn in such a way that Latinos will no longer be able to elect their candidate of choice. But we were able to also increase the numbers from the 33rd congressional district, which is congressional Mark Vesey. Mark Vesey, that seat was not a complete Latino majority seat. It could have been the way we drew it, plus drawing an additional seat north towards the east of that particular seat, plus Houston. That means we would have gone from 8 to 3 more to 11 seats. Instead, we're at 6 right now, which is why we went to court. We also sued in 2019 on the purging that you're talking about. We had a settlement. They agreed to not force people, to intimidate people, because that's what they're doing. These are individuals who were not citizens when they grabbed the driver's license. They were probably green card holders. Along the way, they become United States citizens through the naturalization process. They register to vote, and they vote, and they are being threatened with, you don't have the right to vote, and that's wrong. And they promised not to do this. The last Secretary of State was basically fired, had to resign as a result of a lawsuit, and here they go again. We also sued on the voter ID. We went before the DC federal court, and the DC federal court clearly stated that it was not only unconstitutional, and it was diluting the power of the Latino vote, but that it was done with malice and intent to discriminate. However, moving forward in 2013, the Shelby ruling, which basically gutted the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, gave us a big loss. And so voter ID became legal. It became, that's okay to do that. And so we not only sued on SB4, we we sued on
Texas
the
is getting sued
census.
all the time.
Well, also
Off.
at the national level, we sued the federal on the census when they wanted to do the making sure that no one that wasn't a citizen wasn't counted during the census count. Then they wanted to use only citizens to do the redistricting. That was part of the Maldiv lawsuit, but we're part of that. And then of course in Arizona, when Arizona was basically wanting to have a copy of your birth certificate to demonstrate that you're a citizen, we sued there too. So we have a long history in partnership, not only trying to protect the voting rights of Latinos with Maldiv, but on other issues as well, where we can coalesce and discuss issues on immigration and other areas where we can work together to make this country better for our communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've talked a lot about, the whole census process. I mean, even the fact that there was only 2 seats, it very well could have been 3. If there had maybe been a more concerted effort from the state, regarding getting people registered. And then, as you were mentioning, I'm in North Dallas, and what they did is they took a lot of these pockets in Dallas County and sort of now coupled them to almost Waxahachie, and then up in Collin County they took predominantly minority districts, and those are now in a congressional district that includes Paris, Texas, which is like 2 hours away. It is very, very egregious.
Well, when you think about this, 39.8% of the Texas population is white, but they represent 60% of the districts. Then there's a problem also when 38.4% of the Texas is Latino. And I totally agree with you. Because of a number of factors, when there was the census count, we were not counted properly. We've lost, I think, 1, maybe 2 seats. The Vice President of Maldiv, Nina Perales, would always argue, is it 4 seats or is it 3? She'd say 3, I'd say 4. I think we were both right, though, in that it would have been an additional increase of the 2 congressional seats, but for the failure of this administration, the previous administration, the Trump administration, to not have a full count, to not hire enough people, to not be committed, and then on top of that, to argue that only those who were citizens would be counted. All of those factors led to underrepresentation, which is not only a loss of congressional districts, but it's a loss of money, actual federal dollars that could come here, that could be used for the infrastructure, that could be used for education, a number of factors that we no longer have.
Yeah, it's something like I don't have the right number in front of me, but it was something like over this 10-year period, over like $500 million. And this would have been huge for things like infrastructure and all that. And we should point out that, as you mentioned, the Texas Secretary of State resigned essentially, and the current person who Abbott appointed, not in the legislature, they tried to overturn the presidential election. They signed off on a memo, I think, trying to overturn, I believe it was Pennsylvania.
Right. The current Secretary of State was one of the attorneys for Trump that was involved in trying to revert or move or cancel the elections as they stand, meaning that the President Biden would not be a president today, but instead would be Trump.
Mm-hmm. When this episode airs, early voting will be going on, and I know that this conversation has been a lot of things about sort of the doom and gloom about what is happening with our current voting rights in Texas. But how are you trying to sort of say, like, we still have this work to register voters, we still need to get people to the polls? How do you sort of keep people invested in this and working for democracy?
Well, thank you. I think one of the things that is clear for us at Southwest Voter is we have to be positive. So we always look at the glass half empty or half full rather. And the idea is we are under attack. Democracy is under attack, not only in Texas, but at the national level. when you accumulate all the states and all the different bills that are being passed to suppress the vote, whether it's in Georgia where you can't even take food and water to the polls so that people that have long lines can stay there, which, by the way, in 2020, we were part of giving people food and water in California, in Arizona, in Texas, and in Georgia, but we can't do that anymore in Georgia. So all those coordinated efforts are an attempt to stop people from voting. But for us, we believe that we must organize and mobilize and vote. And you win by organizing, mobilizing, and voting, as well as suing. And when the legislature is making decisions about policies that have to do with election reform and election law, we have to be there present to object if they're bad law and to recommend good laws. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But for this cycle, it's a very important cycle, a lot's at stake. We haven't been able to pass certain bills at the federal level that are too important for us, including how do we rescue the 11 million undocumented. There's a bill that Congressman Castro put out that allows, with Senator Padilla out of California, that allows the 6 million workers that are working right now in the pandemic, and it's called the Essential Workers Act, that would allow 6 million workers. These are workers that feed us, that bring food to our tables, that take care of our children, that take care of our elderly, that are in the hospitals, doctors, teachers, who work for us, who are worried about their livelihood because they're not documented, that would give them a law. Well, this is very important. So we're going to be making sure that we turn out voters in Arizona, in Georgia, in North Carolina, and in Pennsylvania. However, California and Texas are far too important for us. At the top of the ticket in Texas and in California is the gubernatorial election and for governor. And then we also have to worry about local elections that are important to all of us: congressional, assembly, state house, and in some cases, Bexar County judges. So we're very involved. Last cycle, in 2020, we targeted 750,000 voters for Texas. I know we're talking about Texas, so I'll try to stay with Texas. 750,000 Latinos. We hope that this year we will be at 1.5 million voters that we target in Texas, asking them to vote. Our niche is to contact new voters that have just registered to vote, and voters who will be voting for the first time in this cycle. They might have participated in the 2020 election, but they've never voted in a midterm election. And so we're going to do that. We also think that by targeting these voters with a strategy that includes phone banking and, where possible, given the pandemic, door to door, we're also going to obviously talk to them with social media platforms and emails and texting. But we believe that the best way for us to defend ourselves from the attack on democracy is that each one of us also makes a responsibility to take 1 to 10 to 100 people to vote that have never voted. And so we make that pledge to continue to work in making sure that we mobilize, register first, and mobilize and turn out Latino voters. I can tell you already that we have targeted 1,000 high schools in Texas. It is not like a regular year. So if given that strategy of the 1,000 schools that we have targeted in Texas, includes Dallas and Tarrant County and Harris and the Valley, of course, Bexar County, El Paso. We would be, if we did not have the pandemic, we would be literally going into the classrooms and registering the students. And that means that in a very, very modest number would be 140,000 with 1,000 high schools, voters that we would be registered, 18 years old. Every cycle, 18-year-olds, young men and women that are US citizens turn 18. In 4 years, it's about 4 million folks that we're talking about. That's about 230,000 alone in Texas, but nationally it's about 800,000 to 1 million. So we have a lot of work to do with the youth, and we are committed to doing that. because we have the pandemic, we also have to figure out how our principal is going to allow us to speak to their students if the students are not in class. They're being remotely. And because we don't have online voter registration, we have to actually spend money to send them the card, or they have to print them by themselves. And some students do not have the printers and all of that. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but we're prepared to fight for a democracy. People in America have died to defend democracy, and we're prepared to stand and do a good fight for all of us.
Mm-hmm. I'm now thinking of all the states. I think Oregon is one of those that recently passed automatic voter registration. So when you're 16 years old and you register at the DMV, in 2 years, you'll get a reminder or notification that you are pre-registered to vote. Wouldn't that be nice in Texas?
Yeah, California has registration for 16, 17-year-olds, and then 18-year-olds, of course, are they're ready to vote, and they're reminded, as you said. And they have also automatic voter registration. And some states, because of the pandemic, have moved to sending vote by mail without excuses. Not Texas. As you know, there was a lawsuit. We didn't sue that there, but there was a lawsuit to try to change that. And the Texas Supreme Court, which is all governed by Republicans, tore that down. And therefore, if you are worried about your immune system, you go vote, or you worry about getting sick and maybe even dying.
Yes. Well, for folks that do want to maybe volunteer or get involved with your organization, how can they do that?
Oh, that's a wonderful. Just give us a call, send us an email, and we're ready to put you to work. There's simple things like calling voters or helping us design the messages. It's up to your will, your hours, and your talent, and you tell us how you can help us. But every person that can help is welcome to help us. And I can tell you this, Southwest Voter has been able to accomplish what it has accomplished because of the volunteers, because of the people that stand with us. And if you're not able to volunteer in time, send $1, whatever you can. Everything helps.
Well, again, my thanks to Lydia with the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you all for listening to the Tex Mix. We're available on Apple, Google, Anchor. We're still on Spotify, though we'll see about that. And again, thank you so much for supporting us at Texas Signal.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.